Hi, welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about the Layers tab and all the tools in that tab. Okay, right off the bat, we're actually going to start from top to bottom, so we're going to cover the colors first. However, the only thing I'm going to change is I'm going to save the mask and the 3D ruler till last because they're a bit more complex. Okay, for the first part, this little square here is actually to color your layers. For example, let's pick the color red. Now that layer is going to turn red, but it's not going to affect the canvas in any way. And you could really pick the color for any layer, and then you could change it later on, or you can remove it if you find that you don't need it anymore. Now, for the next one, where it says normal, it's actually a list of filters that you can use. I'll leave that tutorial for another time about what all these filters do, but the list there is just a bunch of filters that serve different purposes. Some darken, some lighten, and some have completely other factors that we should keep in mind. And now for the third one, this is very simple. It's opacity, so we're going to put a square and we're going to turn down the opacity. We see it and then we don't. That's all that the first section is. Okay, and for the second layer, okay, we're starting off with a clip to layer below. So for this one, we're actually going to need a second block below. Okay, and now the top layer is the one we're going to turn into a clip layer. And that is what it does. It basically allows you to draw on the item below without interacting with the transparent sections. Since there's only a block here and everything else is empty, it's only going to draw on the block. So whatever you draw on the clip layer is going to cover the block you have below. For example, sorry, let me select another color so you guys can see. So now I can do all these scribbles, but it's only going to be on the block below. It won't affect the block below because it's a separate layer. Let's say you want to try out how it looks before actually putting it on the block itself. Okay, let me label these so you guys don't get confused. Okay. So layer A is the red block, and layer B is the clip layer attached to layer A. Okay, let's clear her up. Okay, so I want to try out how this block would look like if it were blue instead of red. Okay, well, I actually don't like it, but it's a good thing that it wasn't actually affecting layer A. So we could just turn off that layer, layer B, and throw it away if we would like. Or we could keep it experimenting and change it to a green, or if we'd like an orange red. But that is really what clip layer does. However, it can only affect a layer if it is above the desired layer. For example, if we move this clip layer down here, it's going to impact the paper layer, which is basically just a background. Okay, overall the message is if you put it at the very bottom where there is no layers below the clip layer, it will not have an effect. It will actually gray out. Hold on, let me see if I can. There we go. The only reason why it's showing up as pink right now is because there's actually a layer below it, and it's the paper one, which is the background, like I said. And that is why it's showing up that it is able to affect something. So let's delete the background one, and right now you see it's gray, so it's basically ineffective. It's not going to alter really anything. But if we move it back and put it above layer A, that is when it's actually going to affect something. Okay, so for the reference layer, I actually had to set up some things because this actually has to do with the paint tool. So right now I have a bit of a weird design going on, but there's lines and there's a background, which is important. So now we're going to open the paint tool, and right now I have it to refer only to editing layer, which is fine for now. And then we're going to go to this third to last layer where it says refer to layers other than the active one, which is the reference one. It is the second icon. The first one is only going to refer to the layer you are currently on, which is highlighted blue on your layers tab. So if we change it to reference layer, it's only going to affect the one that has the lighthouse. Okay, so we're going to put this one over here. And right now, since it is only affecting the reference layer, it's only listening to the blueprints basically of the reference layer, it's only going to fill in the circles. Regardless of those lines being in the layer that we are on, it's only going to follow the blueprints of the reference layer. So since there's no circles, we're going to try to fill it in, and it'll fill in everything. But we turn on the reference layer again, and it fills in the circles, no problem. Okay, and now for the draft layer. So basically the draft layer is also going to have a little line on the side that has a color similar to the clip layer. However, this one's going to be blue. And this one can also not be made into a clip layer because you see the icon on the side over here turn off. So now we're going to draw a little bit. Okay, and now that's our draft layer. But what's so important about it? It basically tells you that it's a draft layer because it has a little line on the side, but also impacts when you have to export. So right now we're going to try to export PNG. Okay. And see how it's not popping up in the end here? That's because the green squiggly line is labeled as a draft. However, the red square isn't. That's why it's actually showing up. So be careful with that when you're trying to export and overall trying to get certain things on the finalized piece. Next is a lock layer. It's very simple. So we're going to lock the red square. We're gonna try to move it around. We can't. That's when you get the little circle here preventing you from doing anything. Like you can't draw on it, nothing, absolutely nothing. But it's okay, you could unlock it again. And now lock transparency pixels. That one allows you to draw on that layer. However, you can't interact with the transparent section of the drawing. So right now I can't go outside of the bounds of the red square. Right now I'm just passing around the mouse, but it's not letting me because it's locking all the transparent pixels. And like I said, we're skipping right now the mask layer and the 3D ruler. I'm saving those for last. Okay, and now change layer color. This one's fairly simple. So right now we're gonna pick on the red square, select subcolor, and put blue. And now we have a blue square. Fairly simple. You could just mess around with the colors and see what you want and get what you'd like to show. Okay, and for the third layer, for this one I wanted to open up a more complicated piece because I could actually demonstrate how this works. So this here, it says show layer in 2 panels. So that means it's going to divide your layers tab into 2. If you see this little bar here, I'm dragging it, so it's going to divide it. So one section I'm going to have in the end with the bottom layers and the top section with the upper layers. However, one of the things I noticed is that if you have both in the same section, one of them reverts, like it forces it back to the top. I'm not sure how to explain this properly, but it moves you. Like let's say I were to be in this bottom layer, but I have it scrolled, it's going to move the other one so it can match up. I would recommend just having them both separate into separate sections. I hope that made sense. But more commonly though that I've noticed is that it moves the second one. So one that's on the bottom, I would recommend keeping the draft and upper layers down here. So then you could just easily turn on and off the drafts. And also so it doesn't force move it back. I feel like you'd have to experience it in order to understand what I'm trying to say right now. It's because I has done it to me multiple times already, but it's not something like detrimental. It's just like, why does it move it? I'm not entirely sure why it does that, but it does it on occasion. So my best recommendation for that is keeping your drafts on the bottom side of the bar, while all the other layers that you're going to be fixing on the upper side of the bar. As you have previously seen me, this is just a new raster layer, just a typical layer. Here we go. And now this one, you're gonna see a cube. So I'm just gonna put a line here. Okay, and this one's important because you're gonna see on this side over here where it's a long vertical line with all my pins and everything. At the bottom, for me at least, there's going to be a mouse with a corner. And then you select the vector line and then you can move it around. That is the difference between a normal raster layer and a vector layer. Because if I try to do that with a normal layer, it's not going to let me because it is not a raster. A vector layer. So a vector layer, you can move. You say, oh, that line's a little crooked, I need to move it a little bit. Completely fine with a vector layer. But if you try to do that with a raster layer, it is not going to let you. The closest you can get to that is doing it movement with a magic wand. And that's as good as you're gonna get. Or trying to get. And now for the folder. You already saw me do that, but I'll show it again. A folder, simple and easy. However, if you want to move things faster, so you don't have to select one by one, is drag the mouse like this. And you're gonna see a bunch of check marks, drag them up here, and then close. Simple and easy. And, okay, let me show you. Okay, so the next ones are actually merged, but there's a difference between those two merges. Okay, so now we're going to take the first merge layer. So this one, it empties the layer that you took it from. So right now I'm turning it off and on, but nothing's happening. If I turn off the one that merged both items, there's nothing there. That's because the item from the layer I took it from has moved down onto the second layer. So the layer remains there, but it's empty now. Like there's nothing there, you just get to keep an empty layer and then use it however you like. Alright, now the second version of the merge down. So when you merge down this one, it takes the layer. So you don't have the layer available anymore. Obviously you can make another one, however you're just not going to have that extra layer. And then you have to make another one. So that's the difference between merge down the item versus merge down the layer. And one you get to keep an empty layer, and in the other one you don't get to keep the layer. Okay, and for this last one, it's delete, which again you saw me used to do. But here we go again. You have the option of removing the notification of like, oh, don't remind me that I'm deleting this. Like right now it says do not show again. I personally keep it just so I can see that I'm actually deleting the layer, and I'm like, oh, I didn't mean to that, or yeah, I meant to. It's just a minor precaution, that's why I keep it. Okay, and for the mask layer, so we're actually going to go to the third section where it says create mask layer, and then we go back to the second section where it says enable mask, and then you'll see a big red X on it if we don't want it to show. Alright, so it's a bit more complicated, but I would describe it kind of like a preview. So basically right now it's enabled, so we can't see the surrounding part of the first image. So the first image would be him smiling and just pointing, right? And if we want to erase a little bit more, we can. And if we want more of the image to actually show, we'd have to pick a pen, any pen really, but as long as it's not a transparent, it has to be a color. So we color in over here, and there we go. So we have that section showing. And again, if we want to erase a little more, we can. Like I said, it's more of a preview as to, well, this is how I would like my image to look, but I would rather check it out first before actually doing this to the layer. So then we can merge down, and now it's part of the layer. So now they're both merged together. So if I just don't want the first image at all, well, it's just gone. It's just simple like that. I would argue though, it seems a little more complicated because you have to figure out what actually shows up and what actually doesn't show up. So like right now, if I want color on it, it's not really showing up on my drawing. Like I can't really draw on it. It's more about I want this to show up, but not in terms of drawing on it. It's just I want this section of my drawing to show up, or I don't want this, I want that. It's kind of like that. That's how I would describe it. I know it seems a little bit vague, but it's more about, think about the magic wand tool, but except we're doing the selection pen. It would be like that. However, you already have the image, so it's kind of like a easier method of what's actually going to show up and what's not. So for example, I just want him enclosed. So here, so I can see a little better. So now it's just him. But I can't go back and like, oh, let me correct the shading or none of that. Really, it's just, I want this to show up. Or I accidentally cut off too much. So, okay, let me go back and fix it like right now. That's the most you could do with a mask layer. It also has a setting, show mask area. So the purple right now is basically what's not part of the image that's going to show up. Okay, and lastly is the 3D ruler. It actually has to do with the 3D models. Sorry, we can see the 3D ruler. So it's basically just a grid that shows up that where the character, quote unquote, would be standing. So right now I'm gonna try to drag it. I'm trying to press on the blue arrow. Let me turn around so it's a little easier. So right now we're forward and back on the grid that showed. However, when we first saw it, it had a red X on it. That's because it wasn't shown previously. So right now it has enabled show in all layers. And if we don't want it to show up in other layers, basically when we're editing something else that doesn't correspond with the 3D model, we just have to put this third check mark at the bottom. No, sorry. So show only when editing target, which would be the 3D model. And right now, we don't see it anymore. Okay, so another example is when we shift the camera angle. Is right now we're below the grid and looking above the grid. But really, that's just corresponding to the grid itself. However, the folder itself just covers whether or not you want to see the grid, like when you're working on the 3D model, or if you want to see it when it's not necessarily on the focused layer. For example, right now I'm on another layer that doesn't correspond to the 3D model, and now I'm back on it. So then we can see the grid again. And thus, if we put show in all layers, that's when we're gonna see it again. And then show in same folder. So we're going to create a folder, put both of these, make another folder. We can see it again. We move to another folder, we can't see it anymore. But that's really all it does in terms of that tab. However, it doesn't just apply to 3D models, 3D people, because there are other 3D models that can help you with this. For example, the cube, it applies the same. It really doesn't matter if it's a person, a cube, a square, like anything, it'll work out because it's a 3D model, because it has a grid. As long as it has a grid, it'll work out. And that has been all for this tutorial. I hope it has helped. If you have any questions or would like to see tutorials on any other topics that I have not covered, or simply have questions on the tutorial that I covered now, feel free to let me know in the comments or approach me directly. I'm happy to help. But anyway, I hope this has helped, and thank you for watching.